I'll be moderating today's press conference. We have with us on the dais today Alexandre Levesque, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Europe, Arctic, Middle East, and Maghreb; Julie Sunday, Assistant Deputy Minister, Consular, Security, and Emergency Management; Vice Admiral Bob Octorloni, Commander of CJOC, as well as Jennifer McIntyre, the Assistant Deputy Minister for International Affairs and Crisis Response at IRCC, and Patrick Boucher, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, National and Security Cyber Branch. I believe you have a few opening remarks, and then we will open up the room for questions. So, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Modératrice.
Thank you very much, moderator, media.
A lot of activity has taken place since Sunday. First of all, Minister Joly has returned to Canada following her visit to the region, where she met with key counterparts and leaders from international organizations. Minister Hussein has also had phone calls with USAID Administrator Samantha Power and development partner organizations to discuss the humanitarian situation. Canadian ministers will continue to engage international partners and governments in the region to address the ongoing situation. Prime Minister Trudeau is also engaging extensively on this crisis. Yesterday, the Prime Minister had phone calls with the President of Egypt and the Emir of Qatar. Prime Minister underscored the need to protect civilian life and to prevent escalation in the region. In Gaza,
it is imperative that humanitarian aid reaches civilians in need. The population has very limited access to essential goods and services. We continue to monitor the situation closely and call on all parties to respect international humanitarian law and to put forward conditions that will allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. The Canadian Embassy in Israel and our representative office in Ramallah remain open. While we have evacuated some dependents of our Canadian staff, I would also like to clarify that we have reinforced our missions in Tel Aviv and Ramallah with additional staff and resources from our missions in the region and elsewhere. I now turn to my colleague, Julie Sunday, who will provide more details on Canada's consular response.
Merci, Alexandre. Today, I'll once again provide updates on consular services provided and assisted departures. Global Affairs Canada is providing support to 6 Canadian families following deaths of their family members in current hostilities, as well as to the families of 2 other Canadians who are reported missing.
Regarding assisted departures from the region, Global Affairs Canada officials continue to be in regular contact with Canadian citizens, permanent residents, who have requested help in leaving Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. CAF flights from Tel Aviv to Athens. By the end of today, there will have been 12 assisted departure flights out of Tel Aviv to Athens, carrying more than 1,350 passengers. I think it's important to note that these flights will not continue indefinitely. If you intend to leave Israel, I strongly recommend that you contact us and provide your information as soon as possible so that we can put you on a flight. Once you are given a seat on a flight, it is important that you take it. For the time being, there are commercial options out of Tel Aviv, but they remain limited.
For the Gaza Strip, the situation remains extremely fluid, and the Rafah border crossing remains closed. We are also working tirelessly to secure a window for Canadians to exit. We remain in constant communication with allies, the UN, and governments in the region. We are continuing to communicate directly with Canadians who are seeking to leave the Gaza Strip. We know that they are facing extremely difficult conditions. We are giving them the latest information and advising them that we're working to secure an opening of the Rafah crossing for Canadians and that they should be ready to take advantage of any window for a safe exit. Our mission in Cairo is also working with Egyptian authorities to ensure that if they are able to cross at Rafah, Canadians will be transported to Cairo and onward for travel to Canada. For the assisted departure options from the West Bank, as was shared by Minister Joly yesterday, on October 16th, we successfully assisted the departure of 21 Canadians from the West Bank who were taken by bus to Jordan. Our mission in Ramallah is in direct contact with the other Canadians in the West Bank who are seeking support to leave. We will be conducting further assisted departures as needed. We sent out a ROCA message yesterday asking people to get in contact with us urgently if they require assistance. We also called our entire list of affected persons and were only able to get in contact with a handful of individuals. If you are in the West Bank and you need assistance to leave, please be in touch with us urgently and provide your details. Thanks. I'll be pleased to answer any questions. Over to the Vice Admiral.
Bien, merci, Julie. Bonjour, je suis le chef des opérations.
Thank
de la
you,
Force armée canadienne.
Julie.
Aujourd'hui,
Today,
je vais faire une brève mise à jour
I will
sur
give
nos
you a brief
opérations
update on our
pour soutenir
operations
l'affaire mondiale.
to support Global Affairs Canada.
The Canadian Armed Forces air bridge between Israel and Greece continues, and we are continuing to work with Global Affairs Canada to assess demand. There were 2 flights today, and 2 are scheduled for tomorrow. Concurrently, the Canadian Armed Forces are conducting planning and liaison with our Global Affairs colleagues and allies, at the same time posturing personnel to support contingency operation in the region. Speaking to the air bridge, last week in response to requests for federal assistance from Global Affairs Canada, the Canadian Armed Forces began supporting the repatriation of Canadians from Israel on our Airbus aircraft. Under Operation ION, the Canadian Armed Forces has been conducting assisted departure flights of passengers from Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv to Athens, Greece since 12 October. As Julie has noted today, a total of 12 trips so far, with over almost 1,400 passengers repatriated from Israel to Athens. Aujourd'hui, les forces armées canadiennes ont effectué 2
Today, the Canadian Armed Forces flew twice to Tel Aviv, and there will be 2 tomorrow.
Speaking to our Canadian Armed Forces presence in the region, in addition to working with our Global Affairs counterparts in supporting assisted departure flights, the Canadian Armed Forces have also been sending additional personnel to the region to consider and plan for contingency operations in support of Global Affairs Canada and the Government of Canada. To effect command and control of the ongoing efforts in the Middle East, I have directed the stand-up of a task force headquarters based in Cyprus. This task force headquarters now numbers approximately 43 personnel and includes liaison and planning officers located across the region in Cyprus, Greece, and Israel. And importantly, the Canadian Armed Forces personnel, as well as members of Global Affairs Canada, are integrated into the Cyprus-based, UK-led multinational non-combatant evacuation operations coordination center, or the NEOC. Here, like-minded allies are co-locating to consider, to coordinate, and to plan for contingency operations in the event of continued or increased conflict in the region.
Okay, with that, we will go to the floor for questions. It's 1 question, 1 follow-up from the floor. If we have time, we'll move to questions online. I believe our guests can stay until 4 p.m. today, is what I was told. So we'll begin with Catherine Morrison, the Ottawa Citizen.
Hi, thanks so much for your time today. I'm just wondering, following the evacuation of some non-essential staff from missions in Ramallah and Tel Aviv, can you share how many additional staff have been brought in from other Canadian embassies to support the missions as per your update last night? And now that you're brought in, are the 20 members from the Standing Rapid Deployment Team still on the ground as well?
So I'll start with that. In terms of additional staff, we have 25 additional Standing Rapid Deployment Team members that we've deployed across the region. We have approximately 10 of those who are focused right now on Ramallah and Tel Aviv. We have others in Amman, in Cairo, and in Beirut, and Athens, and those staff they have very specialized expertise, and they're bolstering our resources there. Alors, nous avons 25 membres de notre,
We have 25 members
notre équipe
of our team,
spécialisée
our
pour des crises,
Standing
qui est
Rapid
dans la
Deployment
région.
Team in the region.
Il y a à peu près 10 personnes
There's about 10 people
Tel Aviv
in
et
Tel Aviv
Ramallah.
and Ramallah,
Et puis ensuite une autre, 15,
and another
à
15
Athens,
in
à
Athens,
Beyrouth,
Beirut,
aussi
and also
en Égypte.
in
Alors,
Egypt,
et puis aussi la Jordanie.
and also Jordan.
Alors ils sont là pour,
So they're there
pour
to lend their expertise to manage crises. Thank you.
Add that it's really mostly dependents, families that have been evacuated. A very, very small number of non-essential staff have left, one, maybe two, and the vast majority of the input, as my colleague said, of the intake into the region is people with specialized expertise.
Okay, thank you. And it was also reported yesterday that after the first bus evacuation, Israeli authorities imposed new restrictions on diplomatic movements at the Jordanian border, with one of those being to prohibit diplomats from accompanying evacuation buses. I'm just wondering if you can confirm that, and if you can share how many diplomats were a part of the bus evacuation and what the plan will be for these evacuations going forward, considering those restrictions.
I'll just perhaps address the first part of your question and pass it to my colleague for the evacuation. Look, the conversations are ongoing. Negotiations are on the ground between our embassies, and we have multiple missions here, one in Ramallah, one in Tel Aviv, responsible for the movement in and out of the West Bank, and from the West Bank into Jordan. So the situation is very fluid. What I can tell you is that our ambassador is engaging, our ambassador in Israel is engaging the Israeli government to facilitate the movement and make sure that our diplomats can accompany as far as possible the evacuees. And same thing on the other side. Our ambassador and staff in Jordan are meeting them at the border and are negotiating how to maximize access with Jordanian authorities.
Yeah, and I don't have a specific number for our diplomatic staff. There were staff on both sides, so on the Israel side and also on the Jordanian side. And I would just say that, again, the situation is very fluid. We were really pleased. This was a bus with Kansits and also some Australians on it. It was a success, and so we are taking away, our lessons learned and planning it out. But as mentioned before, of course, we need full cooperation of local authorities on both sides, including Israel and Jordan. So we continue to engage to be able to assist more departures.
Valérie? Qu'est-ce qui fait que vous avez autant de difficultés?
Why do you have so much difficulty in evacuating people who are in Gaza? What is blocking this specifically?
Okay. Je ne dirais pas qu'il y a une grande difficulté.
I wouldn't say there's great difficulty in getting people out of Gaza. There's a request, and my colleague will give you a better idea of the numbers of people who've made a request. One, it's a zone where it's very difficult to communicate with Canadians who want assistance, and two, the complexity of traveling in what is essentially a war zone. Israel has declared war. But otherwise, we've managed to accompany, I believe, 18 Canadians. Did you say Gaza? I'm so sorry. I heard the West Bank. I apologize. Could you repeat your question? I understand that it's a war zone, but why is it so difficult to open a crossing to evacuate Canadians in Gaza? Could you also specify how many there are? We talked about a window on Saturday, and now it's Tuesday. Okay. My apologies. I'll start over, thinking of Gaza, not the West Bank. Listen, Gaza is totally closed right now. Negotiations that have happened between different parties, mainly Israel and Egypt, with the support of a number of other countries, including the U.S., is trying to create a corridor so that humans who are trying to leave Gaza can do so safely. It's a war zone. It's extremely dangerous. The crossing point was also bombed. So we know there's a huge danger for individuals, for their safety. That's why it's so complex. But what we find encouraging is that we seem to be getting closer to a solution, a diplomatic solution, that would facilitate a humanitarian corridor.
Yeah.
Problem is on getting people out of Gaza?
Sure. So, as I said, Gaza is currently completely closed. We know that the negotiations are taking place between Israel, Egypt, a number of other countries are involved in creating the safe conditions for an evacuation of foreign nationals. We know how dangerous the situation is inside Gaza. We know that the crossing point has also been damaged due to attacks and bombing. So creating an exit point that is relatively safe for people needs to be negotiated, and guarantees have to be put in place. And that's what the current diplomatic negotiations are all about. We are somewhat encouraged by the fact that we seem to be getting a little bit closer to this, but of course, it's not yet a done deal.
So, and I can just add a few specifics on the numbers. So we still have 370 individuals in Gaza who we are considering affected persons. We are, similar to what the U.S. is messaging, advising people to take, every precaution. But that the window to leave will likely be short, and that we will be communicating that with them, that we are working to negotiate for there to be an opening of the Rafah Gate. We are also very much negotiating to ensure that all Canada entitled persons are able to leave. So this includes Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and their family members. We're quite encouraged, I think, in the discussions that are happening there, and are very hopeful that family members will be included in that exit. And I would also say that our mission in Cairo is ready to move to be able to receive those individuals. So all of that planning has taken place. But as my colleague Alexandre said, this needs a diplomatic solution. Nobody has left Gaza. Not a single person has left Gaza. And that is, something that is very preoccupying for all of us.
Lumière de ce qui s'est passé.
In light of what happened earlier today in Gaza, the bombing of a hospital, how would you react? For Palestinians, for Canadians who are still there? And you talked about the presence of the Canadian Armed Forces in Cyprus. How do you see what will happen, what you can do or would do? Our reaction is of great sadness, great concern. I can only reiterate what the Prime Minister said in the last hour, indicating that what happened in Gaza today is horrible and totally unacceptable, that international humanitarian law must absolutely be respected on all sides, and that civilians must absolutely be protected. Currently, there are over 100 members of the Canadian Armed Forces supporting the mission. There's an air force of over 60 in Athens, and at the same time, there are over 40 in Cyprus with our allies. The 1st Canadian Division of Kingston. It's a liaison and reconnaissance team working with our allies and with Global Affairs Canada and our allies in Cyprus to plan whether there are other consequences. They will continue to be in the region.
Tonda McCharles.
Hi. Just to circle back to the reports of the airstrike on the hospital, can you tell us what information Canada has about what happened there, and whether you have inquired or whether you have any information if there are Canadian Palestinian residents, patients, or medical personnel among the victims?
So I'll take the first one and then pass to Alexandre. But I mean, we're very distressed by the report on the of the impact on that hospital. I do not have any reported deaths at this time, but that can change at any moment given the ongoing conflict and the impact on Gaza.
No, we don't yet have any more specificity. This is very fresh information. We're actively validating the facts on the ground.
well, it's interesting you say you're validating the facts since the Prime Minister's already commented on it. But if you could also then just talk about how you see the conflict more broadly. You talk about contingency planning that Canada's doing and the warnings to people in Lebanon, so Canadians in Lebanon, are to basically get out now. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about how you see this escalating and what Canada is prepared to do in the event of a broader conflict, including in Lebanon. Are you prepared to do assisted departures? Are you actively planning for that kind of thing? Are you planning for any Canadian forces' involvement in any capacity in any of that region?
Perhaps on the conflict first, and then I'll pass on to my colleagues. Look, the situation is obviously very volatile, very fraught with high risk, and the best way to prevent problems is, of course, to prepare for them. A number of actors on the ground have already called for attacks, counterattacks. We've seen Hezbollah weigh in, put in its own red lines, and that's precisely what so much of the diplomatic efforts have been about in the past week and a half. Conversations that both the Prime Minister and Minister Joly have had with actors in the region. All of them are calling for de-escalation. So this is all in the hope that things can be prevented from spilling over in the rest of the region. But of course, in order to face the unexpected, preparations are ongoing. Oui, très bien. Je disais simplement que
Yes, I was simply
le
saying
risque est très élevé.
that the risk is very
Les
high.
tensions sont très
Tensions
élevées,
are very high,
juste à Gaza,
not
en
just in
Israël,
Gaza,
Cisjordanie, mais
in
partout
Israel,
dans la
and the
région.
West Bank, but
Il y a eu un
all over the
échange,
region. We know that there
plusieurs
was
échanges de feu,
a number of
sur la frontière
exchanges
nord d'Israël, la
on
frontière
the
sud du
border
Liban,
north of Israel
entre les
and
positions
south with
israéliennes
Lebanon,
et les positions,
between Lebanon
Hezbollah.
and Hezbollah.
Donc, le risque,
So the
de
risk
débordement régional existe, et c'est
of
précisément pourquoi
going into the region exists, and that's why so many countries are very invested in diplomatic conversations. That is why the Prime Minister and Minister Joly are so active on the phone with regional actors to do everything to de-escalate the situation. But obviously, we need to be ready for risks, and that's why we are taking the necessary measures to prepare.
The other part of that question?
Yeah, Tom, thanks very much. I think, we're obviously concerned about escalation. One miscalculation, we don't want this to escalate into a regional conflict, obviously our concern from the Government of Canada. And I think you're talking about a non-combatant evacuation operation. It's important to note that NEOs are obviously complex and fluid in nature. To be carefully coordinated with partner organizations under Global Affairs Canada lead, obviously working with Global Affairs, Canadian Armed Forces, and our allies. And that's what, that you would expect us to be preparing for this, and when we are. So in terms of, we, as I've mentioned earlier, we deployed liaison reconnaissance teams forward into Cyprus to work with Global Affairs Canada, as well as our allies and partners in the region. So I have a team of over 40 at this time, and they're deployed in Cyprus, Greece, and Israel. You're seeing that as we speak. Obviously considering preliminary movements of, including forward elements of our non-combatant evacuation battalion that is on standby. The vanguard or lead elements of that are preparing to move as we speak into Cyprus, so that we're prepared in the event of contingencies to be able to support Global Affairs Canada if there's a request to support a non-combatant evacuation broader from the region.
But maybe I can comment on where we're at right now. Like right now, we are watching the situation with concern. We are giving advice to Canadians so that they can make decisions around whether or not to leave Lebanon. We have said that from our perspective, individuals should only be there for essential reasons. Why? Because we are concerned there could be a deterioration. And if there is a deterioration, there could be limited commercial options to leave. Whether or not we do or don't do an assisted departure, there are a number of conditions, right, that would have to be met. And one is that we would have to be able to do that assisted departure. And the best advice we can give Canadians right now is to take actions to prevent themselves being in a situation that could deteriorate rapidly. So that is why we're emphasizing the importance of the travel advice. It's crucial that Canadians watch that. That's why we're pushing messaging out on our ROCA and are giving very specific advice about, specifically to avoid that southern region on the border with Israel. So obviously, we always plan. We also work closely with our multinational partners in this part of the world to ensure that we're aligned and we're all sort of in the same space. And I would say our travel advice is very much in line with our allies right now, all of whom are concerned, but signaling to their citizens that it's time to kind of look at your circumstances and determine whether now might be the right moment to leave.
We'll go to Tom next, just to know we only have 5 minutes left for questions, so just flagging that.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I'm just trying to think, how would that compare? I mean, getting people out, getting civilians out of Lebanon, I guess it's hard to predict, but how would it compare to getting them out of Tel Aviv? Is it a more challenging operation?
I think part of the challenge is the number of Canadians in Lebanon. So as I've mentioned, our ROCA right now is at about 14,500. So that's probably a fraction of the Canadians who are there.
So is that the main challenge? There's so many Canadians?
There's quantity, there's there's numbers, there's complexity, depending on how quickly a situation deteriorates, how permissive the environment is, whether the airport is functioning. There's a whole ton of considerations that we work on with our partners at CAF.
Are you sending ships in, for example, or are you just doing tabletop exercises?
We are not sending ships right now. Yeah.
But just to echo what Julie said, Julie nailed it there. There's several complicating factors in the region. Obviously, that's why we put people forward to make sure we're planning this. We're obviously working with the embassy and working with the global affairs staff forward to make sure that we're prepared to do so. But you've highlighted it is incredibly complex. And I think Julie has highlighted that fact, moving out of an area that's already and has some regional instability, and an operation this size, given the size of the ROCA in Lebanon, it will be extremely complex. That's why we're planning with our partners.
But it's also why we're advising Canadians the way we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
One other question on the Rafah Gate. I thought I heard one of you say something about indicate some reason for optimism. I think that I'm paraphrasing someone up there. Are there any indications you have right now that that Gaza the situation in Gaza might open up a little bit to get Canadians out?
We've continued to be hopeful and optimistic day after day, because we know that there's a considerable amount of diplomatic activity with a number of regional players, and we have been among those weighing in to create as much goodwill as possible, to create as safe as possible the conditions to evacuate. So we're hopeful that we're getting closer to that by the day, by the hour.
But have you heard anything specific from any actor there that this might get better?
Nothing specific that I can share at this point, no.
Mackenzie Gray with Global News. Can we just get the fresh numbers on people who want out of Israel and the West Bank as well? And Ms. Sunday, on both of those examples in your opening remarks, you were saying if you have a flight out of Israel, show up. And if we're calling you in the West Bank, pick your phone up. Are people not coming to the flights? Or people not show up in the West Bank? It seems to be a disconnect there.
So let me sort of go through this a little bit. So in Israel, in terms of our affected persons, our list has gone down by 1,000. So we have around 1,800 individuals. We have had cases of individuals being, offered flights and not showing up. What I would say is I think the situation's complex. I think, people are making really difficult decisions right now. Many have longstanding ties in Israel. But what I would say is we have offered 1,800 seats on flights in the past 6 days. And as I mentioned, around 1,350 of those have been, have had a person in them. And so that's sort of, we're looking at gauging what the need is. But as I've said, we can't assume that this will go on indefinitely because of A, the security situation, but B, that initial sort of lack of commercial air access, as many tourists and others were trying to leave, seems to be diminishing. And there seems to be more commercial access, though it is restricted. And again, no North American carriers are flying in. So we're watching that. West Bank, I have 127 affected persons, so that has gone down. And again, these are individuals, many of them with, family members who are non-Canadian or larger families who wouldn't qualify for an assisted departure. And so right now, we are reaching out to all 127. Again, we called last night. I think in that case, it's a matter of the phone lines not being stable right now, which is why we sent a ROCA message out yesterday. So that is like a push to email, so that individuals knew to contact us either through email or through the phone, so that we can keep track of what their needs are. So we're going to continue to follow up with that group to be able to support them. And again, we have reached a handful of people last night, and we have very small numbers who would be looking for a departure in the next day. And in the coming days. So we're looking at how do we do that effectively. But of course, we are there if people would like to be in contact with us, and we hope they will reach out if they require assistance, so that we can plan to be able to assist them. And then in Gaza, I already mentioned we have 370. Thanks.
Just on getting humanitarian aid into Gaza, I think it's one of the only things there seems to be some kind of an agreement on, that there's a very bad situation going on in Gaza and that there's help that can get in there. From the Canadian government's perspective, what is holding up getting aid into Gaza?
Again, these are just very complex, multi-level, multilateral negotiations involving several players. We're among those that are leaning forward and doing everything we can to add our voices to facilitate the entry of humanitarian assistance into Gaza.
President Hamas saying no, we're not letting people in. I'm just looking for more specificity than there's just negotiations.
Yeah, just multi-level complexity.
Handful you mentioned on West Bank, is it not a busload full? Like, you've done one busload at a West Bank, but you don't have enough?
Right now, I don't have another busload I could put together. We certainly have individuals who've identified themselves, and we are looking to support them as quickly as possible. And again, we have communicated that we are there to help assist departures. Alors, maintenant, nous avons...
So now, we don't have many people who are interested in leaving the West Bank. But we are in contact, or we try to be in contact. We are trying to contact everyone so they can tell us if they want our assistance. We are there to organize transportation, to support them. But now we have very low numbers. Thank you.
It's 4 o'clock, but we have 3 more questions on the list. Would you be willing to stay to take them?
Yes.
Okay. Stephanie Taylor.
Hi, Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. Realistically, can Gaza open up without a ceasefire?
I think the complexity of the negotiations reveal, or the length of time it has taken reveals the complexity of the negotiations. Right now, the focus is on coming up with the right circumstances that can allow for access of humanitarian aid.
I know you fully didn't answer. What is? I just want to clarify. Is there a chance? Is the citizenship, is an individual's citizen status part of this negotiation? For example, if the Rafah border opens up, could there be an example where Canadian citizens are able to go through, but if they are married to someone or they have someone in their family for whom they are not a citizen, they will not be permitted to enter? Is that a risk right now for Canadians looking to leave Gaza?
Yes, that's always a risk in these assisted departures. But what I would say is that we are working very diligently to ensure that all Canada entitled persons will be able to leave. So that is Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and their family members. And we are pushing really hard to ensure that that happens. Thanks.
We're going to go online now. Melanie Marquis.
Merci beaucoup, Stéphanie. Merci de rester un peu plus longtemps ici. Merci à vous 5. Pourquoi est-ce qu'on ne commence pas par rapport concernant le Liban? Pourquoi est-ce qu'on ne profite pas du fait que l'aéroport est encore ouvert pour débuter une opération de rapatriement, comme on l'a fait pour Tel Aviv?
Je dirais que c'est parce
I would
qu'il y a-
say that it's
il y a
because
encore des vols commerciaux.
there are still
Il n'y a
commercial
pas un
flights.
problème maintenant
There isn't a
à
problem now
l'aéroport à
at the
Liban.
airport in Lebanon. The security situation in Beirut and in Lebanon is not a problem at this time. The only skirmishes we've seen are on the border with Israel, but the security situation in Beirut and elsewhere, well, there are commercial options, and so it doesn't merit that at this time.
OK. Puis, et quelle fenêtre croyez-vous? En fait, les Canadiens qui sont au Liban, ils ont combien de temps, d'après vous, pour quitter, pour éviter qu'ils se placent en danger? Puis, si je comprends bien, le ROCA n'a pas augmenté à partir du moment où vous avez fait l'avertissement, puis au moment où on se parle. Donc, je vous vois hocher de la tête, Mme Sunday. J'écoute.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
Bon, c'est impossible de prédire.
It's impossible to predict
qu'est-ce qui va arriver.
what will happen,
Mais on donne nos avis,
but we
nos
provide
bonnes, conseils
our best
pour,
guidance
pour que les Canadiens puissent
so that Canadians
prendre les décisions.
can make
Alors,
decisions.
Selon nous,
So, in our opinion,
on pense que maintenant, c'est le
we
moment
believe that now
de commencer
is the time
à
to
partir
begin
du pays,
leaving
à
the
prendre les
country
moyens commerciaux.
by
Parce qu'on
commercial
sait que
means,
maintenant,
because
on
we
a
know
un
that
contexte
now
où il y a des vols.
there are flights.
Mais ça, tout peut changer,
But everything can
très
change
rapidement.
very
On a vu
quickly.
ça, en Israël.
We saw that in Israel,
Et puis, c'est pour cela que
and that is why
nous essayons de,
we are trying
donner les
to
faits, les
provide the
informations,
facts, information
pour soutenir les décisions,
to support decisions
des Canadiens
by Canadians
en cet égard.
in that regard.
The other question we had online disappeared, so I'll just ask, if maybe it's what my colleague Melanie Marquis just said, like, how long do you do this for? How long do you keep the air bridge open? How long do you continue trying to reach people? At what point do you say Canada has done all it can, and now you're on your own?
So, I mean, we assess a lot of things. I would say, like, right now we have sort of three areas that we're focused on, right? We have Israel, we have Gaza, and we have the West Bank. In terms of Israel, as I said, we have almost 1350 who have left. We had more space. We will, we're watching the demand, but last night for, the first time, we saw that number of affected persons go down. So that's a good indicator, and we like to sort of look at that. If we're unable to get people on flights, it's an indication that our numbers are reducing, and, today's flights were lower. So in the case of the West Bank and Gaza, obviously a very particular situation, and it's going to kind of, when that moves, it's going to move quickly and all at once. And so we certainly are going to be focused on that until there's an opening. And on the West Bank, we're assessing. Things can change at any moment, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. We see the situation, again, more access to commercial flights in Israel as an optimistic sign, but we just keep sort of evaluating and looking to support Canadians as required. We do a bit of benchmarking with our allies too. Many of them are doing flights, but looking at out of Israel when they start to sort of reduce those flights as well. I think we're going to see a lot of countries sort of reducing that assisted departure from Israel and maybe focusing their resources in the West Bank and Gaza as that context continues to be unstable. And so we will just continue to assess and take evidence-based decisions.
From BC who can't get her question in. Can I ask it for her? Yeah. Combien de Britanno-Colombiens?
How many British, Colombian, Canadians are there in the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel? Could we have those numbers, or is it an overall number you have? No, it's just Canadians that we talk about. We have an overall number. Thank you.
Thank you very much.